Wake up, critically think, and apply common sense. Can't you see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that virtually all information that we receive about ourselves from white sources are consistently negatively black racially devaluing and demoralizing? It is actually a black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare propaganda campaign. Demoralizing divide and conquer is the method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hatred and disunity amongst them. White social engineering scientists determined a long time ago that by keeping black people believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves, not only makes us much more easier to control and easier to be subjugated, but in fact gives them their greatest power over black people. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive media propaganda campaigns that keeps black people believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves, white oppressive forces have literally created a prison for our minds. It is a very effective system because people are easily controlled by the narratives that they repetitively receive about themselves. When people constantly receive false, positive, and affirming information about themselves, this raises their collective self-esteem and unifies them. It doesn't matter if the information is untrue. All that matters is that the targeted population perceives the information as being true. People function based upon their perceptions of what's true rather than what actually is true. This is why a white social scientist says that perception is more important than reality when it comes to controlling people and for steering society. As I've stated earlier, when people constantly receive false, positive, affirming information about themselves, this raises their collective self-esteem and unifies them. And it doesn't matter that the information is untrue. Most people will respond in the same way because they've all received the same false disinformation. However, when people constantly receive negative information about themselves, fraudulent negative information about themselves, the exact opposite happens. This erodes a people's self-love, unity, morale, and it attacks the core foundation of what bonds the people. It can even prevent their will to protest against their oppressors, and they can then be ruled over forever. No group can be constantly inundated with fraudulent, negative, demoralizing misinformation about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. This is the warfare tactic that white oppressive forces presently deploys against black people. Most black people are clueless of what's being done to us. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. The reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres and defend Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history to the contrary, has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. This noted current mindset that exists amongst far too many black people, and that clearly benefits the white society, was deliberately, secretly embedded into the collective subconscious minds of millions of black people by white propagandists without most of us even realizing it. Because the white society controls the information that we receive, this allows them to control what we believe. They constantly and systematically secretly exploit their monopoly over information that black people receives to manipulate our minds and shape our collective beliefs in ways that serve and protect the system of white supremacy. Keeping black people believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves is how the white society now protects itself from massive unified black retribution. It is a well-proven psychological warfare system because when the oppressed are kept demoralized, divided, and self-loathing, this makes them much more easier to control and to subjugate. It works by affecting subconscious minds of black people through unrelenting black racially demoralizing propaganda, and it utilizes the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Those black people who don't critically think never notice their mental change. More accurately, those black people that do not critically think nor question the validity of all information that they receive from white sources are the ones who never realize this, never notice what's being done to us. The white oppressors are easily able to falsely negatively distort black people's perception of ourselves because they exclusively control black people's narratives, statistics, study results, and they even control our mainstream media images. The white society therefore literally owns black people's interpretation of ourselves. Even more accurately, this means that the white society, black people's interpretation of ourselves remains enslaved by the white society. This allows white oppressive forces to not only subliminally embed black self-contemptuous thoughts into our collective minds, but to also shift black people's collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves. This is the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history to the contrary. This is all possible because the human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. If it's possible to control the input into the human mind, then no matter how intelligent a person may be, it is entirely possible to control what he or she will think. Moreover, people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act upon the information because they've all been given the same disinformation and misinformation. This control system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent, black, racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of black people, without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of black, positive, racially affirming information. It conveys the subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies, and therefore we need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively, subliminally presented with these narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming. Especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects black people in terms of our behaviors. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative information about ourselves, many black people eventually comes to accept those falsehoods and become self-hating. The constant negative propaganda unconsciously influence how many of us within the black population perceives ourselves, how we interact with each other, creating division and self-hatred among us. It also turns our collective frustrations and aggressions away from the white society and redirects it inward towards ourselves. The white society achieved this feat by also brainwashing black people to forget that the white society has never earned the credibility to exclusively control everything that black people believe about ourselves. The white society has never actually earned the blind trust of black people because they've been telling negative, racist, and self-serving lies about black people for more than 500 years. White oppressive forces studied the mechanism and motive of the group mind and of the herd mentality, and then used that gained knowledge to control and regiment the minds of black people according to their will without us even knowing it. This psychological warfare system provides white oppressive forces with a more proficient method for controlling black populations. For unlike the past blatant racist systems that black people were easily able to identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this modern system is not easily recognized nor easily comprehended by its black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in many cases makes many of us even prefer it. It is also at the root of both the profound division and self-hatred now afflicting many black people, and it is at the heart of the internalized feelings of superiority that many whites possess. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. Black people, it's time that we start functioning based upon what is true. And this required gaining a clear and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings remain flawed as a believer is connected to a biblical fairy tale or silly slave syndrome, then all of our liberating remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those who know must teach. The white society has weaponized their monopoly over information and media imageries that are fed into the minds of black people to instill a value system within us that allows them to continue their oppressions of us indefinitely. One love and peace.